You know, this morning we heard from General Mark Milley, we heard from Condoleezza Rice. Multiple speakers said that the divisions in our country are actually becoming a national security issue. Secretary Rice spoke very movingly about her own feelings about January 6th and the attack on our Capitol. And there's no one better to speak to both of those issues, what's happening in the international sphere and in the national sphere, than Representative Adam Schiff, who of course serves as the chair of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, one of the few bipartisan institutions left, and of course also is part of the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack. He's a great public servant. He's served us well from my home state of California. We're very happy to have him here. There's no one better to interview him than Andrea Mitchell, who of course is the chief foreign affairs correspondent and chief Washington correspondent for NBC News, and well known to all of you. I'll let you two take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's so wonderful to be back with Aspen Security. Wonderful to be with you, Chairman Schiff, and to be in person. And I see so many friends and colleagues here today, so thanks to all of you. Mr. Chairman, many of us, probably including yourself, were up all night given the election results. So I did want to start with, as we say, news of the day. And as you might expect, the results.
Do we have to start with news of the day?
Well, there's something to be said for getting it over with quickly. Let's just put it that way. So the results in Virginia, the closeness of the race in New Jersey, as we speak, still not officially called by us, although the indicators are fairly good, depending on mail-in votes. But when I left the air only about an hour ago, they still had only 85% of the results in. And so the analysis, given what is still outstanding in New Jersey, the counties, Essex and Bergen and a few of the others, are fairly positive if historic trends hold for Governor Murphy. But still, it was a 16-point victory in New Jersey for Joe Biden, a 10-point victory in Virginia. Terry McAuliffe did not put together the vote with suburban women, with young people, with black voters that Democrats need, certainly for the midterms. So the first question is just how much of a setback this is. And there's something of a circular firing squad already in the last 24 hours, but where do you assess the blame?
Well, first of all, Andrea, thank you very much for moderating today. And it's wonderful to see you all again and to see you in 3 dimensions. What a treat to be back, and hope this is the first of a great many Aspen conferences in real person. In terms of how to put last night in perspective, look, I wish the results had been an overwhelming election of Terry McAuliffe in Virginia, and while I feel pretty confident that we're going to win the governor's race in New Jersey, I wish it were a more commanding win. What we are seeing, though, is a historic trend in which I think in every presidency since George Herbert Walker Bush, the incumbent in their first term has lost the governor's race in Virginia and New Jersey. So if we pull out New Jersey, that will be aberrant in a positive way. Nonetheless, we also had very large margins in those states in the presidential cycle, larger I think than previously, and so we plainly have a lot of work to do between now and the midterms. One of the things that gives me optimism about the midterms, though, is the historic trend in the midterms would also be for the party in power in the White House to lose seats. But that also depends on another historic trend which really didn't take place in the presidential cycle, and that is that the president had coattails and swept into office a lot of House members of the same party. That didn't happen in the presidential cycle. Joe Biden lost seats in the House. From my point of view, we've already had our correction in the House. And I think whoever wins the House in the midterms will not win it by very much. I think we'll continue to have a very narrowly divided House. But I'm betting on Democrats to be able to hold that because I think we have some of the most talented incumbents we've ever had and some of the most promising new challengers we've ever had. But it will be, I think, down to the wire. The last thing I'll say is I don't think it helped that we didn't get the infrastructure and the reconciliation bills done. That probably would not have been enough to make a difference in Virginia. And if we pull it out in New Jersey, it will be moot as far as New Jersey. But if it had been otherwise in New Jersey, that might very well have cost us a governorship. So, from my point of view, we should have gotten both of these two bills done a week or weeks ago. But I am confident we will get it done, and we'll have a very powerful, positive agenda to run on the midterms.
Well, of course, historic trends, nonetheless, you have the smallest margins conceivable in the House and the Senate. So you're facing some real headwinds going into the midterms. And there are real implications for the January 6th investigation. I want to ask you about that in a moment. But first, just looking at these two elections and looking at the trends and the infrastructure bill and the reconciliation bill, do you blame the progressives for holding out on infrastructure? Do you blame Joe Manchin and Sinema? Who is holding it up?
Yeah. I really don't put blame on the progressives, who I think have been pragmatic and are willing to vote for the infrastructure and the Build Back Better bills without perfect clarity on what happens in the Senate. And in fact, the progressive position has really been consistent with the president's own position. The challenge for us has been that we are nearly unanimous among the Democrats in the House and Senate, but near unanimity is not enough when you have a 50-50 Senate. We need absolute unanimity, and that's hard to come by in either party at any one time. And so, therein lies the challenge. And I think we'll get there. The sooner we get there, the better. But I more than understand the frustration progressives feel that why should two members of the Senate get a complete say in what direction the nation goes? So I understand the frustration. At the same time, we got to get this done. And I view these two bills not only as important in their own right, and when we do get it done, as a mammoth achievement. A New Deal level investment in the American people with a 50-50 divided Senate, and as a practical matter, a 50-50 divided House. That will be an astounding accomplishment. But I also view it, and I know this will be part of our discussion later, I view these two bills as really integral to the democracy agenda. At the end of the day, we have to show that we can deliver as a democracy. We're in a global competition in which the future of democracy is not assured at home or abroad. And part of making the case for democracy is showing it can deliver on the needs of the people.
In terms of showing the case for democracy abroad, how does the refusal of the former president to concede the election and the events of January 6th, how did those events hurt our ability to make the case for democracy around the world?
They're devastating to our efforts to make the case around the country. And indeed, if you look at our competition with China right now, China is extolling what it calls its model of delivering economic prosperity and delivering law and order. People should make no mistake about what that model is. That model is totalitarianism. But nonetheless, around the world, China is pushing its model. And it points to January 6th as Exhibit A, saying democracy doesn't work. People literally climbing the walls of the Capitol and beating police, and now a former president propagating a big lie about the election. If we persuade a significant number of our people, like the former president is trying to do, that we can't rely on our elections to decide who should govern us, then what is left but violence? We had a hearing today in the Intelligence Committee, an open hearing on domestic terrorism. One of the conclusions of the Director of National Intelligence is that part of what's fueling this rise in domestic terror is this claim about massive fraud in the last election. And I think members of Congress who are continuing to push out this big lie bear the same responsibility as the former president for undermining our democracy. And it's weakening our democracy at home, because it's breeding a belief among the American people that our elections can't be relied upon, but it is also, I think, strengthening the case for these dictatorships around the world that the American model of democracy doesn't work anymore.
Do the elections in New Jersey and Virginia, at least the closeness of the election by a complete unknown in New Jersey, and the success in Virginia, give Republicans a new model of how to accept the endorsement of Donald Trump, hold him at arm's length, and enhance his ability to remain a force in Republican politics? Or is it the opposite?
I think it's going to be very difficult for Republicans to walk that line in the midterms. They walk that line by walking away from the president in these governor's races. But in the midterm elections, Donald Trump is out endorsing people, picking favorites, running campaigns against those that have distanced themselves from him. So he is going to be very much on the ballot in the midterms. And I don't think people are going to be able to so easily walk away from him while the Republican Party has hugged him close. So I'm more optimistic about the midterms than I was about in particular, the Virginia governor's race, for the reason that the president has so involved himself in trying to choose who will be the Republican nominee for Senate and in many of the pivotal House races.
And how critical is it, given your role in the January 6th committee, given that investigation, to get people to testify? Because clearly, if the Republicans do retake the House, it's the end of that committee, it's the end of the subpoena power.
I think you're absolutely right. Trump did not want the committee to get started, get underway, get in the evidence, and Kevin McCarthy is willing to do whatever Donald Trump wants. And so opposed a commission where Democrats and Republicans would have equal power to appoint commissioners. That wasn't good enough, and then opposed the select committee when the Speaker opted to form that instead. They'll continue obstructing it, and should they ever regain power in the House, they will do away with the investigation altogether. Why would the Republican Party want an investigation when it continues to push the same lie that helped incite the attack on the Capitol to begin with? So we feel, even while I am confident and hopeful and optimistic about the midterms, we also feel a sense of urgency, quite separate and apart from the midterms, but really based on the fact that those forces that attacked the Capitol that day haven't gone away. The incidents of domestic terrorism just continue to rise, and one of the fundamental aims of our committee is to expose all the malefactors that were involved in January 6th, but also to put forward a series of recommendations to protect the country going forward. And we shouldn't delay that, one day more than is necessary to get the evidence. But we are going to have to fight in court. The former president has long history, which I'm all too familiar with, of using the courts to stonewall even an investigation as vital as this one. But I'm very encouraged by the position that the Biden administration is taking. Every president tries to preserve and protect the prerogatives of that presidency. And so it's no small matter that President Biden is saying, I'm not asserting privilege, even though, down the road it would be advantageous for him to be able to assert privilege in the future potentially, because he recognizes the central importance of getting all the answers when it comes to a violent attack on the seat of our democracy.
Do you think the election results are a reflection on President Biden and his inability to get Congress moving?
I think that the president's poll numbers are always correlated to how campaigns for governor and the midterms go. I don't know whether it's causation or merely correlation. But look, we bear part of that responsibility in Congress for not getting these bills passed in a more timely way. And so we're just going to have to do it. And I think the other, big overarching influence on all of this is the pandemic. And I hope and pray, for reasons having nothing to do with the midterms, but for the nation's sake, that next year we're in a much better place when it comes to the pandemic. And if we are in a much better place when it comes to the pandemic, we'll be in a much better place when it comes to the economy. And we will have the powerful track record to run on of these two incredible bills, but also the rescue plan. And that will, I think, be a very fruitful environment for Democrats in the midterms, and we should have some wind at our backs.
I want to ask you a few things about China, including something that the General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, of course, said to my colleague Lester Holt here this morning when Lester asked about the hypersonic missile test and other recent aggressions by China militarily. And the chairman said, "We are entering into a tripolar world with the United States, Russia, and China being all great powers. Just by introducing 3 versus 2, you're getting increased complexity. Now if you add into that all the other technologies that are coming at us quickly, we are entering a world, in my view, we are entering into a world that is potentially much more strategically unstable than, say, the last 40, 50, 60, 70 years." So when we talk about technology, we're talking about cyber, but we're now also talking about the hypersonic missile. It's very clear from my reporting that that test and what it achieved and what it didn't achieve its targeting, but was a surprise to the intelligence community.
Andrea, I think, first of all, I would agree with the general sentiments. I think we are in a more unstable and complex national security environment globally than we have been, certainly in my lifetime. In terms of China's role in that instability, China is an incredibly worthy rival, potential adversary across every domain, land, sea, space, cyber, technology, economically, developmentally, and every otherwise. We're going to have to be at the top of our game to maintain our position of global leadership, and we have not been at the top of our game, certainly over the last 4 years. But in terms of how we have discouraged talented people from coming to this country, that preceded Donald Trump, and it is a terrible liability. My district is the home I share with Judy Chu of Caltech and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. We have some of the most brilliant people from all over the world that come to study at Caltech, who want to stay, who want to be part of the American economy and grow businesses here, and we kick them out, which is just economically suicidal. That's but one of many examples in which we're getting in our own way. We also need to be leading the energy revolution and developing renewable energy technologies and not ceding that to China. Whoever wins that race will develop huge economic rewards. And we need to be economically competitive if we're going to be competitive in terms of our national security. So I completely concur with the rapid pace of Chinese technological development. It's simply astonishing. And I also think in the cyber world, we're dealing with just a multitude of new and dangerous threats and trends which will provide increasing instability. Cyber is the asymmetric battlefield of all asymmetric battlefields. And we've got so much to do to better protect ourselves, to hold malefactors accountable. For one thing, I think we need to establish an international law of the land that if there are hacking, ransomware operations, criminal gangs operating from your soil and you're not taking action against them, then the international community will hold you responsible for any losses that are incurred. That needs to become a staple, I think, of international law, in addition to the other cyber deterrents that we can provide.
The Pentagon today, in a new report, said China could have 700 nuclear warheads by 2027, possibly 1,000 by 2030. What do you think China's goal is?
I think their goal writ large is to move expeditiously in a very radically different direction that President Xi has moved China in, which is no longer looking inward, no longer defensive and insular, but rather looking outward at the rest of the world and wanting to be a global peer in every domain and a global power. And I think China views having a much larger nuclear force and deterrent as part of cementing its standing as a truly global power. Let's hope it's not more than that. But I think that's what's really driving it.
China has engaged in a lot of aggressive acts, including saber rattling towards Taiwan, verbally and militarily. Should the United States defend Taiwan if attacked or invaded?
I think we need to be much clearer about our obligation to defend Taiwan. And I also think that we need to help provide Taiwan with a wherewithal where it can defend itself, knowing that Taiwan, if China is determined, is ill-positioned to defend. Nonetheless, Taiwan can raise the cost on China of any military effort. We also, I think, need to work with our international partners to make it abundantly clear to China what a significant cost it would pay were it to use force to try to invade and take over Taiwan. I am deeply concerned about what lesson China apparently has learned from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Russia's continued occupation of Ukraine, and that unless we can establish a stronger international deterrent, then China and Russia will feel that in this century it is once again permissible to remake the map of the world by dint of military force. So I don't know that I have the best way to articulate the defense posture vis-a-vis Taiwan, but I think probably less ambiguity is better than more ambiguity, and I also think that we need to work on equipping Taiwan, Ukraine, and other allies to raise the costs on any adversarial power that means to use military force to remake the map.
And how do we signal to China the price they would pay?
I think in a couple ways. I think we do so in our private discussions with China so as not to seek to embarrass, but also in our work with our allies to make it clear that we are united with our allies around the world and in the region, and that the economic consequences would be too great for China to bear. That, I think, may be the most effective deterrent. And obviously there's a fine line to walk in when we talk about coming to Taiwan's military aid, where we don't want to make any pronouncement that would accelerate Chinese thinking or timetable in terms of using military force against Taiwan.
And Iran, there's confusion today about what happened in the Gulf of Oman with an incident, but beyond that, if they do not return to the negotiating table this month, as has now been suggested, are we reaching the point where we have to, as the Secretary of State has indicated, come up with another approach because of how close they're getting to break up?
Well, tragically, I think we are now where many of us thought we would be if we withdrew from the nuclear agreement, which is Iran would be much closer to developing a bomb with far less to constrain it globally and economically. And so I think the decision of the prior administration has been disastrous. I'm reminded of a conversation that we had with one of your colleagues, Tom Friedman, many years ago about Iraq, when someone asked in our caucus what his recommendation was about what we ought to do on Iraq, and he said, well, I'm kind of reminded of the street cop in New York who's asked directions, and the cop says, he's asked directions by a tourist, and the cop says, well, to start out, I wouldn't begin from here. And it's very hard to say where we ought to begin with Iran because things have proceeded in the wrong direction for so long. But I think that if we can't get Iran through negotiation back to the table in the JCPOA, then we're going to have to once again really ramp up sanctions and get the international community together as we once had the international community together. And reassembling that will be difficult because the international community will rightly question whether America will stand by its agreements if the next administration can simply renege on what the last one did.
I want to ask you about the Havana Syndrome, which has had a huge morale impact on our intelligence personnel and our diplomats. Are we any closer to discovering what kind of microwave-directed energy, what kind of device could be causing this, and attribution?
I would say that we are marginally closer. I don't feel that I can express a lot more optimism than that. I think we're making progress, but it has been very slow and much slower than certainly I think any of us would like to see. It's not for lack of effort. I think Director Burns has really done a sea change in terms of attitude within the agency, how seriously we're taking this, how proactively we're responding to the needs of the workforce, and this is true in the State Department as well. I don't mean to just single out one element of the IC, but we are working very proactively to provide the best care, provide the best guidance to people serving overseas about how to take care of themselves, how to respond if they believe they've been the subject of an attack, and of course directing some of the most capable resources we have to the problem set of what's causing this, who's causing this, how is it being caused. But I wish I could tell you I had better visibility on that than I do. I still personally have profound questions about what is causing this and whether it is one cause or several, and so we still, I believe, have a lot of work ahead of us.
Do you think it is something that some have suggested that it could have started as surveillance, routines collection, that has now become weaponized?
I think there's certainly one plausible hypothesis that this that the physical impacts are not the intended impacts. That is, that this could be a form of surveillance that is causing a physical impact. But if that is the case and an adversarial power was engaged in surveillance that is having this kind of physical injury, at a certain point, knowledge becomes intention. Now, it could have been intentional from the beginning, or it could be otherwise. Because we have so much work yet to do on what's causing this, I don't think we're in a position to say, who's behind it, how they're behind it, why they're behind it. I think there's still large unresolved questions.
I think we need to take some questions from the audience as well. Congresswoman Jane Harman.
I'm Jane Harman, President Emerita of the Wilson Center and a former colleague of Adams, and very pleased with the job he's doing. A thought on Iran, which is we have additional allies, more than the P5+1. We have the Sunni Arab states who have a stake in this too, and I'm hopeful that we are encouraging them to do what they can to calm Iran down and to slow this down. But my question's different. My question's about Congress. As you would know, Adam, over the recent decades, Congress's role in foreign policy has been tiny. I'm not talking about the intel committees, but Congress passed 2 authorizations to use military force at the beginning of this century. Both are outdated. At least one has no relevance at all, the one on Iraq. The other one, most of us think should be repealed and revised. Will Congress have any appetite to re-engage as a partner in foreign policy, as Joe Biden did when he chaired the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, given the fact that most people think the loss in Virginia, for example, was based on Terry McAuliffe's failure to focus on the economy, the pandemic, and education, local issues? Is Congress going to go right there and again abdicate for the next few years its rightful role as a partner on foreign policy?
Jane, thank you for the question, and thank you for your many years of service. I'm always flattered when you say that you were Adam Schiff before Adam Schiff was Adam Schiff. Jane was my predecessor as the ranking on the Intelligence Committee. I think there is that appetite, and Chairman Meeks has been organizing a working group of which I'm a part to propose a new AUMF as a way of phasing out the 2001 and doing away with the 2002. I introduced a bill on this subject many years ago that sought to repeal and replace the existing authorizations. I tried doing that during the Obama administration without success, and found, frankly, that while President Obama favored repealing and replacing those prior authorizations, he wasn't willing to care more about it than Congress. It was the congressional prerogative that was really being lost And he did put forward a proposal, but I don't think he was willing to invest the political muscle to get it done because it appeared Congress wasn't particularly interested in it. Congress is deeply interested in it now, but we're really, I think, going to have to be the driver. I think the president is focused on, obviously, the economic agenda, but also voting rights, which is also a key agenda for the administration and for Congress. And I think there's a way to do this that cabins the president's authority, but doesn't do so in a way that the executive branch would feel so restricted that it couldn't respond. One of the challenges, if we make the AOMF too restrictive, the president does what the president is going to do, and it merely has the effect of expanding their power under Article 2. But there is, to answer your question, keen interest among many of us who've been working together, and we hope to have a work product fairly soon.
And do we have time for one more question? Let's just go in the back.
Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today. You were speaking earlier just kind of to, your colleagues and things of that nature and how you guys are fostering kind of, new blood and bringing new people in and how excited you are for 2022 and the midterms and what they're going to look like. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you guys are doing? I would like to hear from both parties what you guys are doing to bring in new blood, especially into Congress. I know right now we're kind of seeing our Senate, quite frankly, age out. And I think that that's kind of a big issue that we're seeing with Joe Manchin blocking, the infrastructure package. So if you could elaborate on that, I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you.
Just notable that there was a real decline in the young vote yesterday.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I found really most encouraging over the last 4 years, which was admittedly not a particularly encouraging period of time politically, I think, for many people in the country, is that the class of candidates in 2018 and in 2020 were, I think, the best classes of new candidates Congress has ever had. And I will hold up the class of 2018 to the Watergate babies any day of the week. And in the same way, I believe that after 9/11, people chose to join the service to protect the country. After people saw what the prior administration was doing to tear down so many of the institutions of our democracy, people stepped forward to serve in a different way by running for office. And not surprisingly, a lot of those people in the class of 2018 are veterans of the armed forces, veterans of the State Department, veterans of the intelligence community, and that was their new way to serve. Now, of course, a lot of them were not in those categories, but they're now household names, truly talented, many very young, that have, I think, breathed a lot of new blood into the Congress. The class of 2020 got wiped out because there was a downward drag on the ticket that in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party we didn't see coming. And that was a terrible tragedy because the class of 2020 was, in my view, the Democratic class was every bit as good as the class of 2018, except their timing was lousy. And from what I'm seeing so far of those that are testing the waters, and a lot of it is still uncertain because of reapportionment this cycle, the incoming crop of people running for office is also quite extraordinary. So I don't know that I can say this is the product of organized outreach so much as people really stepping up on their own. And it's absolutely vital. I think that our generation, the generation before mine, have done such a terrible job in being stewards of the planet, and lately stewards of the country, that we really are looking to your generation to move the country forward. And I increasingly take my view as one of just trying to be a steward to hand it off to your generation. But before, if this is the last question, we conclude. I just, Andrea, want to thank you and other members of the press, because one of the institutions that has been so torn down, I think, and attacked and vilified over the last several years is the institution of the press. And I know how many threats that you and others have received. And I think that you have held each president to the same standard, which has been a challenge in the last 4 years. And I'm grateful to all the members of the press because our free and open society really depends on a vigorous and free press, and I know it's been an equally challenging time for you all, and I wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you to you.
Well, thank you, and from what we read in your New York Times bestseller, Washington at Midnight, you and your family have suffered disproportionately for your public service beyond measure, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.